This is Look West, a podcast from California's Assembly Democrats.
For nearly half of Californians, there ain't nothing going on but the rent.
Recently, on a windy and rainy evening in Sacramento, close to 100 people crowded into a bar near the Capitol to say in unison, "The rent is too damn high."
You are at our very first event ever.
Hi, I'm Marianne Conroe with Look West. Haney is the founder and chair of the California Legislative Renters Caucus. Assembly members Isaac Bryan, Tasha Borner, and Alex Lee are also members of the Renters Caucus. I sat down with Assemblymember Haney to talk about tenant life and why he formed the Renters Caucus. So what was your first apartment like?
My first apartment. Well, I grew up in apartments as a kid. My family were renters most of my life. I lived with my mom and my sister, and we actually, the first apartment that we lived in as a family is my mom was a student at UC Berkeley, and we lived in the UC Village, was what it was called, the student family housing. It was a great place to live because we had these sort of old school courtyards. I think it was built in the 40s or 50s, and you would just go out there and all the kids would be out there. They'd play, and we'd have people from all over the world were there. So it was really a great place to grow up, and I kind of view myself as an apartment kid because we moved 10 or 11 times during my childhood, all to various apartments. And at each one, I met different types of people and had to learn how to get along with people. And it was a great way to grow up and probably helped me in some ways have the skills and ability to adapt that helped me to get to where I am now.
For sure, yeah. Apartments sometimes are like paper thin, so you hear what's going on next door as well.
Oh yeah, you got to get to know people, and you have people from all over, different experiences, socioeconomics. It's the world, and I think it was a great way to grow up and to get to know my neighbors. And I think there are good things about multifamily units and apartments, and I think it's made me also an advocate for those type of living environments and folks, and just like anybody else.
Well, that answers my next question too. Like, what was the best thing about living in apartments? And you kind of mentioned
yes,
the diversity.
Well, and the families. I think obviously you can have that in a neighborhood with single-family homes and where most people own their homes. And there are some challenges, of course, also about being in a place where everybody is renting. People were coming and going all the time, and so some of the stability isn't there. But certainly there is very diverse, and you meet people from all over, and you get to know people. And as a kid, you got to learn how to play with the big kids too. You're the little one, and you got to learn how to survive. And I think it was a big part of how I came to understand the world, and even how I started to get interested in being a positive part of my community.
Mm-hmm. And so on the flip side, what do you think are the worst things about living in an apartment?
We certainly, when I was growing up, my mom lost our housing in some cases because we were evicted or because the rent went up. And I think that was hard. Moving, I had to move schools a few times. Being in a place where you have uncertainty around your living situation is hard for people, especially for families, kids who are in school. And so I think the uncertainty and the insecurity that comes with being a renter and maybe not knowing how long you'll be at a place and not having total control over that is a big part of what is hard about being a renter. You don't necessarily control your own property, and like you said, maybe some noise or some things that are challenging. Something's not working, it's broken, and it's not getting fixed, and all of that. So, I think the ability to build wealth through ownership is something that is really important. And of course, when you're a renter, you're turning over your check and you're not seeing it back. So that part of it is there, but certainly there are challenges as well, absolutely, and obviously a need for support from government and officials.
And it just makes perfect sense that you become the chair of the Renters Caucus now that you're in the legislature. So can you tell us a little bit more how you started that? What was your
Sure.
experience in getting it going, and how did you find out that these other members were also renters as well?
Sure. So I had heard that there was only a handful of renters in the legislature when I was running. And so when I got up here, we did a little kind of informal survey of the folks around and came to understand that at the time there were only three of us. At least we believed there were only three of us. And so at the time it was myself and Isaac Bryan and Alex Lee. And I invited them to a meeting in my office, which was the first meeting of the Renters Caucus. And I told them, let's pull this together. And because there was only three of us, it was a quick vote for who would be the chair. They said, seems like you. All right, we need a vice chair. All right, Isaac. I guess that makes Alex the secretary or the treasurer or both. It was a small group, and we decided we were going to spend some time coming up with bylaws and coming up with a plan for what we were going to do and advocating together. That was in late in the session in 2022 when I had first got up here. And so we started that effort back up again in the beginning of 2023. And at that time, we found that we now had a senator, Senator Wahab, and there was a renter we were not aware of who came forward, and that was Tasha Berner. So we had five of us, and during our first year, we were able to actually do some good work together, support each other, and actually get some bills passed. So, and also really create a bit more visibility for renters and the needs of renters. Obviously, there was only so much we could do with just the five of us. But we were able to, I think, bring to light this larger issue of the gap between representation for renters in the legislature and the need for some policy advocacy and change and more legislation that supported renters.
Right, and this also happened after the pandemic and the moratorium on evictions was lifted, and they could raise the rent up to a certain, no more than 10%, but that also created a lot of evictions because people pushed them out. So that was a good time for you to step in.
And I think during the pandemic there was more needed attention to the vulnerability of renters, because if you weren't making money, you were in danger of losing your home. And if you lost your home, you wouldn't have a place to shelter in place. Due to no fault of your own, you were going to take on a huge amount of rent debt. And so that was a challenge that really required public policy intervention. And we wanted to continue to elevate that visibility, because it wasn't just during the pandemic where renters needed help. For a variety of reasons, renters in California face some of the biggest challenges of anywhere in the country. And yet, out of the 120 members of the legislature, there are only 5 renters, identified out renters, and that's a small percentage, whereas over 40% of California's households are renters, but just about 5% of the members of the legislature.
Yeah. What is the biggest policy issue today for renters?
The rent is too damn high. That's the biggest policy issue. You have all those sayings, rent is too damn high. They're for nearly half of Californians. There ain't nothing going on but the rent, literally. In that Californians are in the top 3. If you look at pretty much any category when it comes to how much they pay in rent, how rent burdened they are, the percentage of Californians that are paying over 30% or over 50% of rent is higher as a percentage and a total amount than nearly anywhere else in the country. We have more renters than everywhere but one other state, I believe, as an overall percentage. So we've got a lot of renters, and our renters are having a tougher time. More of them are in danger of being evicted than anywhere else. And when you add all that up, not only is this one of the top, if not the top issue that the residents of California identify. They in polls they say housing and affordability is the top issue. It also leads to other huge challenges that we have. California has 12% of the country's population, but about half of the people that are unsheltered homeless are in California. Obviously, that's related to the challenges that people face in being able to afford rent and stay in their homes. We have one of the worst levels of housing per capita in the country. We are short millions of units of housing. So all of these things are felt by all Californians. I mean, every California experiences the challenges of having such a high level of homelessness. Also, the cost of buying a home is higher than anywhere else, and the burdens of being a renter. So this is something everyone experiences, and there are renters in every community across the state. And so being able to have an affordable place to call home that is stable, that is less than 30% of your overall income, is the biggest challenge that we are facing, not only for California's renters, but for California, period.
You had a bill last year that helped put a cap on or a ceiling on the deposits. Do you want to talk anything about that?
Yes, AB 12, we got that passed into law, and that will put a cap. California's renters, when they tried to move in somewhere, they were sometimes being asked and could be asked under the law for 2 or even 3 months of the equivalent of their rent just to move in. That means that for some people in parts of the state, they would need $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 just to move in. We know that very few Californians have that. And the result is that landlords were losing out on good tenants. Renters, families were staying in crowded units. They were staying far from work or school. If you wonder why sometimes for a restaurant or something, it's hard for them to get employees, well, it's as any restaurant owner knows, it's partly because it's hard for them to their potential employees to get housing near where they work. And so this is really something that we think helps everyone to just set this base number of 1 month of rent as security deposit. Over 10 other states already had it. And so we passed that into law, and it was great to see so much support from my colleagues. You know, the renter-friendly pro-tenant bills can be very hard to get done in Sacramento, in part because we're underrepresented, in part because the folks who maybe are advocating sometimes on the other side are well represented. But we really approached this as a common sense issue. We worked closely even with landlords and were able to work out some of the concerns that they had, and didn't frame this as I said, just an issue that renters should care about. Every legislator represents renters, and this is a common sense way for us to deal with an affordability issue, and it's a fair way to do it. And we framed it that way, and we were able to get a lot of support, and actually, because so many of my colleagues are homeowners, the majority of homeowners supported the bill, and I think actually the majority of landlords in the legislature supported the bill. So because we're a small group, we've got to do some coalition building around here, and we certainly did that on that bill.
Can you tell a little bit about your legislation for this year for renters? Sure.
Yes, I've got a number of bills to support renters. You know, one of the things that we want to do with the Renters Caucus is to be clear that we're not saying people should only be renters or that renters are better than homeowners or anything like that. In fact, part of what we want to see is lower rents, but also more opportunities for renters to be able to get into home ownership. And one of the barriers that we've heard from folks a lot is renters being able to build up their credit to be able to get in a place where they can buy a home. And so we've got a bill that will allow for universal positive reporting for renters to their credit scores. What that means is if you pay your rent on time, that will be automatically reported that you're paying your rent on time, just the positive reporting. And that will help them build their credit so that they can have ownership, whether that's a car or when they go and get another unit, that they'll have a better credit for that, and hopefully maybe even buy a home. So that I have a bill that will make us the first state to have universal positive reporting for renters. We also have a bill that will expand access to housing for renters who are pet owners. Now, I've come to understand that over 2/3 of renters in California own pets. And the majority of Californians own pets. And yet, if you look for a unit as a pet owner, it can be near impossible. Here in Sacramento and San Francisco, Los Angeles, less than 30% of the available units on the market are available to renters with pets, which means that the majority of renters can't access the majority of units. That means the housing crisis will continue to be especially acute for renters with pets, even if we build more housing. And so we looked into some possible solutions to that. I mean, not only can they not find housing, but they're often charged pet deposit, additional pet rent. They can experience a lot of challenges up front in not even being considered, either because there's an entire no pet ban of any kind, or if they apply as a renter with a pet, they're not considered because the ones without pets are considered first. So we have a bill that will create a lot of new protections for renters with pets. We think, again, it's a fair and balanced thing. You can still set reasonable restrictions if there are health or safety or allergies or size or those sort of things, but you actually have to state what those restrictions are, and you have to state why they're a reason for them, which right now is not required at all. And we also want disclosing pets on the application, as long as you meet whatever requirements exist, to be optional. We've heard really a lot of stories from constituents about when they put their dogs or their cats down on their application, they just don't even get considered. And the result is that not only do they not get an apartment, but sometimes they hide their animal. We have estimates over 1 million renters are just not disclosing that they have a pet or a dog to their landlord. That's not good for anyone. Or we also have a crisis in our shelters with animals being abandoned. And then lastly, we're putting some limits on exorbitant deposits and rent and pet rent. So this is a kind of a fairness for all renters, including Renters with Pets Act. And we obviously have a ways to go to kind of work out some of the details of it. But we do have a big problem right now for not only for all renters, but a particular problem for renters with pets. And if you're a pet owner out there, you're probably not willing to give up your dog or your cat. It's a member of your family, and so you should have a place to live.
So recently you held an event about the Renters Caucus, and I'm sure a lot of information came out of that. What did you get out of that?
It was a great event. Despite being a rainy night, we had a huge turnout. And it was really great to see so many folks from the Capitol community, staff, even though there are maybe not that many renters who are legislators, most of the staff here are renters. And they have been very excited, and it really is wonderful to have them not only feel seen by what we're doing, but look for ways for them to actually get directly involved. I hope that they can get in their boss's ears when we get these bills coming through about why this is important. And we really want to activate them and advocates and others to engage here. I think people feel like advocacy for renters is something that really directly impacts them in their lives, but they don't necessarily see a lot of that conversation in the building. So we're kind of helping to close that gap, and we are doing it with these folks. So we heard a lot. Actually, they got to put up little sticky notes of what they wanted us to work on. I did see a few things about pets, so we saw that there. I did see even a few things about credit scores and how credit scores go into this. Ultimately, people are concerned about the cost of rent and fear of evictions and some different things around rent increases, and so we're working on all of those things with them, and we have a great caucus. Most of our caucus members were there, as were some ally members. We invited all the legislators, not just the renter legislators, and because it's the right thing to do. They all represent renters, but also we're going to need them. We're going to need everyone, the staff, everyone who showed up, and so if we're going to get this done, we need everybody's help.
And so is California a leader when it comes to protecting tenants?
We are not a leader on the most fundamental basic issues that California renters experience, which is the cost of their rent and housing every month, and the consequences of not being able to afford housing makes California, unfortunately, puts us in a very bad place when it comes to the experiences of renters. Certainly, we've done some good around, I think, capping some of the larger rent increases, and I really commend my colleagues for stepping up on that. I think we have strong protections around requiring just cause for evictions and things that I think California is leading on and should continue to lead on. Where we got to catch up is we got to make sure there's more housing available, and we've got to bring the cost of housing down and help to keep people in their homes so they don't become homeless to begin with. There was a big study that was done by UCSF on the causes of the really high rates and numbers of homelessness in California, and they came to a maybe not quite shocking conclusion, which is that California has higher levels of homelessness fundamentally because our rent is too high and the cost of housing is too high when compared to how much people make. And that puts us in, if you look at the charts across the country, California really is at the extreme on those questions. And that means as policymakers, we have a huge urgency to act. And I really do commend also my colleagues on taking action on housing. There have been a lot of really important bills that have expanded opportunities to build housing, invested in housing. Housing is the top priority for this legislature and this governor, along with homelessness. And we're seeing progress. But what we're here to also say, I think, as renters is we got to move faster, we got to go bigger, and we got to take care of people along the way, because it does take a while to build this housing. There's a lot of parts of our state also where they say no multifamily housing is allowed. And that means, in many cases, no renters allowed. And there's still some stigma around that. And so not only does the Renters Caucus hope to bring attention to the policy changes that need to be made to address that, we're also saying renters are just like you. They're your neighbors. They're just like my family. They contribute to a community. And people should be open about being a renter, because it reduces some of that stigma that can lead to people saying we should keep renters out. And that is something, unfortunately, we still see all over, including in San Francisco and neighborhoods and parts of my own city where we want to build more housing, more multifamily housing, more affordable housing. You see a lot of resistance to that still. And there's really no good reason for it, because renters are just like you and me. And you should be very happy to have them, just as you should to have homeowners in your community.
Our thanks to Assemblymember Matt Haney. I'm Marianne Conroe with Look West. Thank you for listening.
The Look West podcast is produced for the Assembly Democratic Caucus by the DCO Pod Squad. Please smash that like button, share the episode, and subscribe to hear all the Look West episodes. A new episode of the Look West podcast drops on the third Thursday of every month. Thanks again for listening, and remember, when you think of California and politics, remember to look west.